Enough time has passed. Kagurabachi, that's a funny way to spell peak fiction. The first manga to sell a Kagura billion copies. Attack on good writing? Mid-Slayer? The Sukuna glazing hour? Oh, I'm sorry, I meant lobotomy Kaizen. Hope you're all ready for your lessons in peak. Okay, I'm done. Let's just start the video. Depending on how terminally online and or brain dead you are, the name Kagurabachi will either do absolutely nothing for you because you've never heard of it, or have you rolling your eyes so far back you'll get retinal detachment. Before Kagurabachi even came out, it was memed to almost Morbius proportions, and honestly, I have no idea why. There was nothing from the outset that seemed to mark this series as anything special, other than the aggressive marketing Shonen Jump was doing for it, which, now that I think about it, was probably the only reason for the memes in the first place. People probably just looked at it and assumed it was the manga equivalent of an industry plant. And I suppose when you think of it like that, I can't blame the jokers. With this being the only real exposure I had to the series though, I can't say I ever felt any real need to check it out. The first chapter dropped and I couldn't care less. Eventually I stopped seeing the memes everywhere and kinda just forgot about the series altogether. And then, a few months later, this page finds its way onto my timeline and I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was the intriguing Shigaraki-esque design of the villain, the brilliantly comedic paneling, or the ominously framed declaration of love. But something about this one page made me more interested in Kagurabachi than months of memes had. It was like I had this realization of, oh yeah, this is an actual series, not just a long-running joke. So I thought, fuck it, why not give it a shot? I've been looking for a manga to fill the hole My Hero Academia left after things went sour. If nothing else, I could at least say I actually read it, which I doubt many of the people who made those peak fiction memes did. And honestly, I think that's disappointing. Because, to my complete and utter surprise, Kagurabachi might actually be peak fiction. No point in delaying things any more than we already have. Let's get into this.
Formulate strategies, fuck random battling. All that I do, yeah, I do for a cause. You'll save a rattling, man, it's so maddening. All this bad karma is giving me pause. You make a victim, you really a villain. Random act of violence, you really a whore. Though I'm not like you, I do understand your random act of kindness. You die by the sword!
Part of the whole joke with Kagurabachi was that it seemed to be nothing special, especially proportionally to its hype, and initially, looking at the first chapter, you kind of feel that's the case, even if it does seem to be told with quality. The protagonist of Kagurabachi is Chihiro Rokuhira, only son of famed swordsmith Kunishige, who is renowned for his creation of the enchanted blades. 6 extremely powerful katana that can amplify a person's natural spirit energy to superhuman levels, letting them perform ungodly feats of sorcery. One day, the Rokuhara home is raided, the blades taken, and Kunishige killed by a mysterious gang of sorcerers called the Hishaku, led by a man named Yura, leaving behind only his son and one final, hidden 7th blade, Enten. Chihiro takes the blade, and after 3 years of training with his dad's old friend Shiba, suddenly and ruthlessly bursts onto the scene, tearing a hole in the Japanese underground as he seeks to recover the 6 enchanted blades and honor his father's memory by preventing their use for oppression. But details, whatever. It's a story about a young orphan with special protagonist powers on a MacGuffin hunt. Granted, one that's a fair bit darker and moodier than its contemporaries, but still doesn't seem too memorable at first. But don't be so dismissive of those details, because although the premise didn't blow me away, it was those details. Everything from the nuances of its character writing to the intricacies of its paneling that did. It's only right that we kick things off with our leading man, Chihiro. Going into it, you might suspect him to be little more than a bland, pissy edgelord whose only personality trait is, I am vengeance. I mean, just look at him. All he's missing is the fedora.
And just listen to these lines.
Every morning, when I wash my face and look in the mirror, I see this scar, and I remember that day. So every day, I start the morning with fresh hatred.
Oh, come on, is this a try not to laugh challenge?
However, as early as chapter 2, I began to realise that this is a bit of a mischaracterization of Chihiro. In fact, I actually suspect that chapter 1 was written a fair bit earlier than the rest of the series. There's that much of an evolution between chapters. One of the most important realizations I had being that Chihiro isn't edgy, he's just legit depressed and scarred.
You can really see and feel the weight of his trauma filtering down into so many of his actions and behaviours. The series doesn't just show us it once to justify the protagonist being an unlikable homicidal psychopath. It keeps getting brought up. There are constant reminders of Kunishige everywhere. One of my favourite examples of this is the fact that Enten's abilities manifest as the 3 goldfish that Kunishige bought on a whim and Chihiro ended up taking care of, which end up becoming almost this symbol of what he's lost. It's almost like Chihiro is using those happy memories to fight back against his trauma, represented by the criminal scum he's fighting against, who he honestly isn't that much better than. Because although Chihiro's quest for vengeance explains his seemingly endless and wanton slaughter, the manga doesn't equate that with justifying it. If anything, it goes out of its way to show that murdering crowds worth of people in a blind fit of vengeance, no matter how bad they are, is really not a good coping mechanism.
Do I seem sane to you? I don't care if they're monsters. I have to cut them down.
But more on this topic later. I think it also helps that Chihiro's generally stern, serious demeanour is made to clash with the eccentric goofballs he often finds himself in the company of, be they friend or foe. It's like if Guts from Berserk was forced to interact with the cast of Fire Force on a regular basis, who range from just kinda peppy and quirky to legitimately psychotic. Next to these weirdos, Chihiro comes across a lot more exasperated and chilled out than angry and edgy, and despite how easy it would have been to make him this focused, cold and uncaring dickhead, he's arguably the most empathetic character in the series. He doesn't like fighting people he doesn't have to, he's great with kids, guy was called Dad Hero in the Sojo arc for a reason. He's just a cool, collected and nice person, if you ignore all the murder, which means when he can't hold back anymore, when the rage and grief does get too much to hide away and his face contorts with emotion, it's legit a powerful, significant moment.
It's a fine line to walk, having a character's theme be a present, relevant factor in their life, but also not completely define them as an individual. But I think Chihiro does in fact walk that line. He really makes me think of Robert Pattinson's Batman, and if Takeru Hokuzono's author comments are anything to go by, that's no coincidence. Because the series is still so new, just a little over a year old, naturally there isn't too much to say about every supporting character like Shiba or Hinao or the Masumi, who kinda just dip in and out of the story as and when they're needed. Not that they aren't cool characters, like I said, they all contrast really well with Chihiro, but they just haven't had their time in the spotlight yet, which I hope they do get. There are of course plenty of other characters who do warrant a discussion, but I feel like it will be better to tackle them as they become relevant once we start talking about specific story arcs and themes.
To briefly go over the villains, the formula thus far has been to have a present, active antagonist who functions as the main enemy for each arc, while Yura manipulates things behind the scenes, acting as the long-term threat. Though the third arc is bucking the trend somewhat by serving as the setup for the story's conflict for the foreseeable future.
Regardless, I only have hopes for the future because each one so far has been great. I'll be going over them in slightly more detail later, but I really do like this approach of having each arc focus on a different villain.
Firstly, it lets the actual main antagonist, the aforementioned Yura, marinate behind the scenes, giving us the time and space to get to know him slowly and intimately, so that whenever he does finally take center stage, it'll hopefully be really impactful and meaningful.
And secondly, it means we can have distinctive, varied, and specific antagonists that are each designed to challenge Chihiro and his allies as they exist within one arc. Sojo is pretty iconic at this point, and for good reason. He kicks things off with a bang and a half, and the conflicts and story development he brings forth are great, especially since he's the first villain and needs to hook readers in. He's a fantastic foil to Chihiro, challenging him in more ways than just physical, and sets up some of the story's most important and interesting themes. More on him later. Kiora, through his role as an underground auctioneer, serves as a great way to expand the world and setting, as well as introduce multiple other supporting characters. His relationship to them further develops the themes Sojo set up, and though he at first doesn't seem to possess the same explosive and greasy charisma as his predecessor, by the arc's end, he's revealed himself to be just as entertaining and compelling as Sojo. Again, more on him later. Finally, we have Haruhiko, who is Mahito from Jujutsu Kaisen. He's literally just Mahito. Not really, but come on. Due to how the Swordbearer assassination arc is set up, Haruhiko doesn't get as much of a spotlight as the other antagonists. However, the implication is that he will continue to be an active player in this game far past this arc, and will continue to develop and grow alongside Chihiro, which is very exciting given that his presence, words, and actions are very much designed to mirror and fracture Chihiro's philosophy. Again, more on him later. One other thing I will say before we move on is that the characters on the whole are actually pretty adult, at least compared to your general shonen cast. Chihiro is 18, which, while far from the oldest, does put him more towards the upper range than a lot of his contemporaries. I mean, I can't think of too many shonen protagonists who canonically have a driver's license. How is man younger than me and has his driver's license? And with few exceptions, most of the other characters only get older from there. It's just an interesting detail I noticed, and I wonder if it's because Takeru Hokuzono wanted to work with more mature characters in order to tell his story. Regardless of his reasoning, I have to say, it's kinda refreshing. But enough about them, let's expand our view and switch our focus to the world these characters inhabit. Given Kagurabachi's brisk pacing, it's perhaps not that surprising that it doesn't devote too much time to deep world building. I think this is most apparent with the magic system, which is given a pretty basic, generic explanation, with most of its details having to be inferred by observation or told to us as and when they're needed. Everyone has spirit energy, with those able to regulate and control it called sorcerers, whose energy manifests in different forms, and that's more or less all you need to know. Occasionally interesting details are dropped, such as the fact that the source of power seems to be the brain, with one character needing to undergo neurological surgery to fix an issue with overexertion, which grounds it a bit in science, or the mechanic of a person's innate sorcery being taken in exchange for bonding with an enchanted blade. However, the most in-depth it usually gets is detailing each enchanted blade as it appears, and the Rakuzachi arc, which introduces the storehouse ability held by the Sanazami clan, but it isn't so much an avenue to explore the world as it is used as a plot device to keep the story moving and introduce new characters. To be honest, I don't mind the story having a basic power system and developing it ad hoc. Having a layered and intricate one can be good, but I also don't like it when a series gets too bogged down in them, which can lead to excessively complex, detailed, narrated, and hard to understand fights. In that case, I'd rather a comparatively simple power system that can then be taken in interesting directions and evolutions as and when needed, should the author choose. Doesn't change how sick the fights look either. Moving on to the actual world, again, not that much time has been devoted to it, which I actually do think is a shame, because I'd really be interested in seeing more of it. The way I would describe it, it's like an early 20th century Japanese period drama merged with a late 20th century American crime thriller, except surprise, it's actually set in 2005. Or, to put it another way, it's like if Demon Slayer had a child with The Godfather, who they named Kill Bill. You have a lot of traditionally Japanese elements, especially in the architecture, but at the same time you also have things like flip phones and modern cafes. Certain characters have older, more traditional fashion sensibilities, others are a lot more contemporary. Cars exist, but in very old-fashioned designs. This all creates this really interesting, anachronistic hodgepodge, which actually tracks given Haku Hokuzono's intentions. He's talked about wanting to recreate the specific, slightly exaggerated version of Japan you tend to see in Western films. I'm gonna be honest though, the first thing I thought of when I noticed this was Riverdale. Hope this is the first and last time I compare these two series. I wonder if it's a Full Metal Alchemist type situation where the development of a specific science or technology came at the cost of another, resulting in significant social change. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have yet to see a single firearm in the series. Is that the result of sorcery? Does the fact that WMDs in this universe take the form of swords imply that other forms of weaponry, like tanks and nukes, don't exist? There's a lot of potential in this world, which is why I am a little disappointed we haven't seen too much of it at this point. I know the series is only a year old with likely many more ahead, so there's still plenty of time to explore it, but the series' fast pacing, usually seen as a strength, could come to bite it in the future. I remember reaching the end of the second arc and thinking, okay, we've had two hype as shit, action-filled roller coaster rides back to back. Now things are gonna slow down a little. We've introduced a bunch of new characters we're gonna explore. We might even get some political drama and what? Oh, the Hishaku are coming? Back to the action it is. Gonna be honest, I couldn't help but feel disappointed when Chihiro's trial at the Kamubani, basically sorcerer military police, was abruptly cut short after just one chapter, though the Swordbearer assassination arc has really gotten into the swing of things, and I'm really loving it. But I still hope that between the hype set pieces, we still do get those slower, more reflective moments that made the characters so good, and I'm sure can also flesh out the world just as well. There are a few cool things to point to about the art and design of this series, so we'll tackle them one aspect at a time. The characters' designs, both in how they're drawn and how they dress, are really interesting. If I had to compare it to something, it kinda has the slightly whimsical yet also gothic/punk adjacent aesthetic of Soul Eater, while also reminding me a bit of id Invaded's faces, in particular the weird, exaggerated eyes and simple faces, as well as the sophisticated, formal yet elaborate and stylish clothing, particularly among the various brilliant detectives and sorcerers respectively. It's a pretty versatile style, allowing for characters that have big, obvious expressions, as well as those with more subtle and complex ones. And of course, arguably most important in a series like this, they all look sick as fuck. I know Trenchcoat and Katana is an easy combo to make fun of, but if Devil May Cry has taught us anything, even the most ridiculous shit can be cool if committed to hard enough. And Chihiro's look commits to hell and back. I think the zip-up turtleneck underneath really brings it all together. I don't know, it's nice to have layers and it kinda softens him up a bit. I'll rattle off a few other character designs I like. There's Shiba, whose outfit is simpler and whiter than other characters, but actually stands out nicely because of it. In the Volume 1 extras, you can see his original design, which had sunglasses and a floral look, which makes him look like he walked out of Yakuza. Hilarious, but obvious why it had to change. You've also got Hinao, who looks sick as hell with the bomber jacket uniform combo, very business casual while still adding some alternative flair, especially with the multicolored hair. Kinda gives me cute emo vibes. You'd expect her to be the manager of a Hot Topic instead of what I think is an organized criminal job agency. Is there anyone in this series I won't see at The Hague? And to close things out, we have Hiyuki, who has, moving on. If there's one thing I really appreciate, it's when a comic gets really creative and purposeful with its panels. This is one of the reasons I like Tatsuki Fujimoto's work so much. The man is just a genius when it comes to paneling, so much so that when Chainsaw Man was adapted to anime, despite how good of an adaptation that was, it was impossible not to lose something, and honestly, I think an inevitable Kagurabachi anime is gonna face those same struggles.
This is something you can see even in that one page that made me want to give the series a shot. Sojo dominates the top half, giving real weight to his declaration of admiration, followed immediately by this little sliver of Chihiro going, "What?" It's actually even better in context because this sudden declaration really does come out of nowhere. The two of them have spent the last 4 pages wordlessly fighting each other, the only dialogue being Chihiro's inner commentary. You turn the page expecting the action to continue, only for Sojo to suddenly start talking about how much he loves Chihiro's dad. No wonder he's so confused.
This is something that Junji Ito uses to great effect, taking advantage of the fact that in order to continue to experience the story being told through a manga, you have to physically turn a page as you would with any print-based medium. Ito is able to use this to build tension and create some really horrifying moments of surprise. And though Kagurabachi isn't a horror, this technique is something that Hokuzono very much makes use of to build anticipation.
Watching something build up to the last panel, turning the page and being met with, more often than not, a gorgeously illustrated double spread. It's honestly some of the most hype I've ever felt reading an action manga. I legit got chills watching one of Enten's goldfish silently swim through a group of thugs, following their gaze all the way to the last panel and turning the page to see Chihiro standing there at the end of the hall, barely visible with a corpse at his feet looking like a fucking slasher villain. Or Chihiro thinking back to his father about a deep conversation they had about the right mindset a sorcerer has to be in, the page ending with the levity of Chihiro making fun of his shirt, only for the next page to just hit you with his dead body. And Jesus, I need to stop adding to the script or it'll never get done, but chapter 52 literally just dropped, and the way that Chihiro's eyes were drawn in this chapter, the shaky, messy line work when Hirohiko suggests that he is the same as him is such a great way of conveying pure, traumatic rage. The just exhausted, miserable way he looks at the people running from him in panic. It's peak, it's peak. I'm sorry, but the memes were true. My favourite page thus far has to be this one in chapter 2. The silent, melancholy intricacies in Chihiro's expression as the fish swim around his blade, water droplets floating from it. The 2 panels beneath pulling out further, showing his isolation as he waits at his hideout in Tokyo. It's cinema, straight up. There are other nice touches as well, the borders between panels being the slashes from Enten, the page background actually being the tail end of an attack, the page turning from white to black as we enter a flashback, the paralleling of Chihiro and Hiyuki as they make their way towards each other, each page of them cutting through gangsters perfectly mirrored until they finally meet in this great double spread of symmetry. It's so good, which brings me to the final big thing I love about this series' art. This is one aspect of the series that really makes me preemptively disappointed about an anime adaptation, because I know it's the one thing they could never translate, unless they go the route of the Uzumaki anime. To give you an idea of how long this video has been in the works, that last sentence was written before the Uzumaki anime actually came out, and needless to say, I don't want the Kagurabachi anime to go down that route.
The world of Kagurabachi has colour, obviously. You can see that when you look at the coloured chapter and volume covers. You can see that Enten's goldfish are red and white, and that the blade clearly makes use of water, which is clear. The manga itself, however, is black and white, like most, and Hokuzono is clearly leaning into this.
Since the goldfish Chihiro uses are A, dark colours like black and red, and B, have water trails that blend into them, this means that the water looks less like water and actually looks closer to ink.
This is doubly so thanks to his nishiki technique, where he cloaks himself in spirit energy, which blends with his dark clothes in a way that makes him look like liquid as he moves and swims through the air. Add to that all the blood flying everywhere, and it almost creates the impression that the pages are drowning in themselves, melting into these fluid yet still distinct forms. And, Christ, I need to stop adding shit to this script or I'll never get this video out. And I know I said that exact same sentence like not even 2 minutes ago, but how could I not include chapter 53? I mean, just look at what's on page. Man's running Shonen Jump out of business with these ink costs. It works especially well since Haruhiko's innate sorcery involves the manipulation of pure white paper, one of the many things about him that contrasts with Chihiro. So to illustrate the shifting of the tides of battle in the latter's favour by literally bathing the page in his dominant colour, it's so cool and creative. This strong use of black is something that really brings together both the aforementioned character designs, which predominantly feature dark clothing, and strong page layouts, which are well arranged to encourage that illusion of motion. All of this put together creates a manga that is just an all-around feast for the eyes, and I look forward to the incredible visuals every chapter.
Kagurabachi.
Before we carry on with the video, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a few things. Firstly, music. Starting with the Bag of Milk video this time last year, I've made music for every single video, no matter how small. But matching the scale of this video, the resulting soundtrack is by far the largest, most ambitious and comprehensive body of music I've ever made up to this point, even surpassing my standalone album, The Universe is a God-Shaped Hole. All the music featured in this video, as well as probably some other tracks that I couldn't find a place for but still wanted to make, are contained within the album Swords and Synthesizers, which, if all goes well, should be live on streaming services at the same time as this video, and will definitely be on YouTube and Bandcamp. It was a lot of work to put all this together, probably one of the biggest reasons this video took so long to make, but also, if I'm being honest, probably the biggest reason I made it in the first place. Usually for videos of this scale and focus, like the Bag of Milk or Signalis videos, I try and match the music to a pre-existing soundtrack so it all creates a cohesive experience. But here, since I'm making this before any anime soundtrack or OP and ED have come out, I was pretty much free to define Kagurabachi's musical identity however I pleased. And it was an extremely fun process, and though it ended up taking much more work than I initially presumed, partially because I kept adding tracks, I think it's resulted in some of my best work yet. So if you've been listening to the music in this video and like what you're hearing, or just want to support me, then the link to the album will be in the description, the end card, as well as the pinned comment. Speaking of support, I also want to take this opportunity to thank my patrons, in particular my tier 3 patron Michael Coolwood for their support. If you'd like to be credited in videos like them, as well as receive benefits like behind the scenes updates and early access to music, then be sure to sign up to my Patreon, link in the description. Once again, thank you to all my patrons for this video. I know I was blueballing you with this one, but what can I say? Just needed more time in the oven. I lied. I could have put this out months ago. I just kept adding shit because the story just gets crazier and crazier. It's peak. I can't help it. It's peak. Alright, I've been waffling on long enough. But before we get back to talking about Kagurabachi, there is one thing I would like to show you. Something that I'm very excited for you to see more of.
Is it working? Okay, cool. Hey there, to whoever's listening. I'm Damian Bachman, member of University of Washington's class of 2008 and communications major. Since I graduated, I've been staying at my aunt's house in Kings Creek, Washington, where I've had a lot of time on my hands. I've been sleeping in my late uncle's old study, you see, and he was something of a scientist. He studied weird stuff. He left a lot of old files. Well, they're labeled like files, but they read more like old horror stories. It's not like ghost stories or anything, at least not in the traditional sense, but you read through it and there's some real spooky stuff. Spooky enough that I figured that it would be entertaining to read aloud into a microphone. Not like I've got a lot else to do. But before we get into any files, let's take a look at this note that I found inside of his old desk. I think it adds something to the experience. Anyway, without further ado, to whom it may concern, I, Marcus John Bachman, make this statement of sound mind and body, and assert that I am as calm and collected as I can be under the present circumstances. If you're reading this, that means that you need to leave. You need to get out. You're probably reading my research, trying to find out what happened to me, but it's not worth it. I'm already done for. I've been caught in a web, in its web, and I beg of you to squash any curiosity you have, and trust me, you do not want to walk down this path. I hope you make the right decision. Like I said, spooky. Don't worry about it too much, though. Uncle Mark died of a stroke a couple years ago, so he probably wrote this while spiraling from that. Or something like that, I don't know. I'm not a brain scientist. And that's only a taste of what you'll get from my as-of-yet unnamed podcast. What scares and horrors will await? Is it real or is it fake? Who knows? What I do know is that I, Damian Bachman, will be your guide all through it. I'll see you then.
Kings Creek, a new weekly horror podcast, coming 2025.
Kagurabachi.
It's nice, of course, if a story has good characters, an interesting world, and flashy visuals, but if you're familiar with this channel at all, then you know I'm all about that thematic analysis. And while bearing in mind that the series is only in its third arc, it seems to be already well into exploring its main theme, legacy. Specifically family legacy, how people deal with the weight of their family history, how they come to terms with the actions and deeds of their family, including and especially in cases where those deeds and actions have negative consequences. The series most noticeably does this with the complex legacy of Kunishige Rokuhira and his enchanted blades, which are generally revered as the means through which Japan ended its last major war. However, the enchanted blades are literal weapons of mass destruction, and any peace obtained through them is only achieved through fear and violence. Kunishige says as much himself, that it doesn't matter if katana are used for peace, their one purpose is to kill people, and the makers of such weapons are ultimately, knowingly even, complicit in those deaths. As such, Chihiro, when embarking on his quest for vengeance, adopts a philosophy that the blade should only be wielded against evildoers, making his endeavour not just one of avenging his father's death, but also living up to his values by keeping the enchanted blades pure. In his own words,
I can't allow slime like you to wield katana.
And so, for years he doggedly walks on, slaughtering criminals without a second thought, until he finds himself face to face with Sojo.
Tell me why you wield the sword. I want to know if you're worthy of it.
To defeat evil and protect the weak. Always.
I knew it. I'm the only one who understands him.
Now Sojo is not a good human being. Far from it, actually. I'd say he's in fact no more than fucking horrendous.
He is a man who thrives off of violence, death, and suffering, leaving a trail of blood everywhere he goes just because he can.
And yet, he is able to connect with Kunishige in a way that even his own son is unable to. And that is because he sees the enchanted blades for what they are.
All the literature says the same thing. I can't stand it. Calling him a hero. What an insult. On and on with their flowery words. There's only one reason to make weapons. He gave birth to the enchanted blades. The ultimate weapons of slaughter. Their only purpose is to kill. Altruism. Nothing could be more inappropriate to Rokuhira's weapons of mass destruction.
And hearing this, Chihiro is furious, offended even. Katana are wielded to protect the weak, to save people. That's what he believed. And what's more, it's what he knows his father believed too. But then he cools his head, and more importantly, sees the damage that enchanted blades can do when turned against innocence, which causes him to appreciate his father's words about the inherent violence of all weapons, regardless of intention.
Katana have always saved lives and slashed open new eras, but, I'm sure you know, they're still tools for killing people. We are complicit in the deaths they cause.
It's basically an unspoken reality that everyone has to acknowledge, that Japan's reverence for Kunishige and his weapons is only possible because they were the side that used them, and should those very same weapons be turned against them, the course and perception of history itself could change. This is a fact readily embraced and welcomed by Hiyuki, a government-employed sorcerer who is basically a walking nuke in and of herself. By this point, the terrifying power of the enchanted blades has been made more than clear, if for no other reason than the fact that, thanks to Kagurabachi's breakneck pacing, multiple named characters have been killed and maimed by them. When the lid gets blown off and all the fighting begins to get the government's attention, she gets sent in to bring Chihiro's blades in, and when she finds him, she makes it clear that nobody has any business wielding something like an enchanted blade, including Chihiro.
Noble beliefs, huh? Whatever your beliefs, an individual who wields a sacred blade is acting in self-interest. You've got no business wielding a weapon of that magnitude in self-service. It should be controlled by the Kaminabi for the welfare of the nation. You met Kazane, right? He lost his right shoulder and almost everyone he admired. His tragedy is what happens when an individual possesses a sacred blade. If you continue wielding that sacred blade, it will bring more misery.
The final battle with Sojo is a literal battle, yes, but also a metaphorical discussion. A conversation where the two parties explain themselves and their ideas as they come to understand each other. Chihiro coming to accept that both of their interpretations of the enchanted blades, of Kunishige's legacy, are valid. This whole chapter is not only a really cool way to present the fight, not only a roundabout yet interesting discussion about the concept of death of the author, but also a mission statement that Kagurabachi is willing to look at legacy as a multifaceted, complex thing that is almost never totally good or totally bad. More than just living up to a legacy, it asks what you do when you have to accept that a legacy you want to live up to might have parts better left in the past.
I'll wield the sword with my own beliefs, as a weapon of mass destruction.
But that's wrong. Every day I saw how my dad approached the sword. Every single day.
I've already reached my conclusion, because just like you rescued that kid, the fact remains, it answered my convictions. You think you're the only one who can speak for Rokuhira? I thought the same, but that's wrong. Anyone can take on that role. That's why this battle is meaningful.
I accept that. Both of us speak for my father, which is precisely why I won't show you any respect. The only thing I'll do is cut you down with even thicker bloodlust.
This is something we're seeing brought up again in the Swordbearer assassination arc, with Haruhiko needling the parallels between him and Chihiro, getting under his skin like nobody else by pointing out how both their hands are soaked in blood, even at a similarly young age. He uses this similarity to further question the legacy of Kunishige and the Enchanted Blades, taking advantage of the fact that, to the average viewer, there is no difference between him and Chihiro. They are both sorcerers using unnatural, horrifying powers and weaponry to slaughter hundreds in the name of their own mission, and though he might believe himself to be operating with a higher sense of morality than the Hishaku, the path Chihiro is following may in practice turn out to be no different than that of his enemies.
When I turned 18, my hands were already covered in blood. And you're the same. You feel it, don't you? To the average person, you're a monster.
Don't worry. I'm a sinner too. The first time I killed a person, I accepted that I'm a monster. The least I can do is refrain from causing harm to others, and take you Hishaku bastards to hell with me.
And yes, to those of you screaming at the screen for me to talk about the rat in the room that I am pointedly avoiding, no, I will not be talking about that, because then this video really would never come out. God damn it, I really am gonna have to make another video about this, aren't I? See you back here in like 2 or 3 years, I guess. Like and subscribe if you want to see it. The concept of familial legacy being something that can haunt you more than it helps you is also explored through other characters. In the first arc, you have Char, the final known member of a clan known for their regenerative powers. Because of this, she and her mother are both kidnapped and experimented on by Sojo, who sought to learn more about the secrets of the Enchanted Blades, and viewed her family power as a means of doing so. While he has them, he berates Char's mother for having the audacity to bring her into the world, knowing the kind of suffering she'd endure solely for being her daughter. Char, however, never resents her for this, always thanking her mum for doing her best to make her life a joyful one. In turn, she thanks her daughter for teaching her that, regardless of your legacy, happiness is always something within your grasp. In the second arc, Chihiro finds himself tangled up in all sorts of toxic family business, when he and his allies end up in conflict with the Sanazami clan, who, I mean, in what way aren't these guys fucked up? They've been running an underground auction called the Rakuzachi for centuries, and are so devoted to this tradition that they're willing to sacrifice themselves and each other to see its successful continuation. A spirit epitomized by the family head, Kyora. Like Sojo before him, Kyora is a piece of shit. In his slavish devotion to his family's traditions, he grooms and abuses his children into being the perfect little servants. His wife uses her dying words to tell him how miserable she's been with him, which is a power move as far as I'm concerned. But what I love about Kyora as an antagonist is how he embodies the idea of generational trauma. Abused children growing up to continue those same practices on their own because it's all they can do. It's all they know. There's this phenomenal moment where he's at his weakest, on the verge of being possessed by the enchanted blade Magatsumi. He remembers his wife's dying words and briefly wonders what could have been if he had just let it all go. What kind of life could he have led? What kind of family could he have raised? All of that shattered as the auction hammer comes down. The Rakuzachi may have ruined his life, but at this point, it is his life. It is all he knows. And so, despite knowing where it will lead him, he cannot stop. He mustn't stop. He can only proceed. The reason I failed. You were right, Chihiro Rokuhara. He didn't align with my ideals, so I turned away. I'm the only one who failed to fulfill my duty. Kagurabachi is shaping up to be a series that is not only acknowledging the morally grey nature of its premise and characters, but happily wallowing in it. I haven't even talked about the significance of having all this talk about war crimes and the ethics of using weapons of mass destruction in a Japanese series, but like, I don't think I need to spell it out for you. I've seen manga poke at nuanced, interesting, and challenging ideas and let me down before, so I'm hesitant to say that Kagurabachi pulls it off with 100% certainty. We need to see how this all resolves first, but right now, at this moment, I am fucking feasting on this. And unfortunately, this is where my analysis has to start wrapping up. Like I've mentioned, Kagurabachi is a young series. It's only a little over a year into publication, and at the time of writing, is tying the bow on only its third arc, meaning that there are still things we just don't really know enough about to truly judge, or even really talk about, like the literal main antagonist Yura. I'd love to talk more about him, since he's got some pretty mad aura points, and his sudden reveal makes for one of the more shocking and exciting moments in the second arc. But other than that, we don't have too much to work with when it comes to really analysing or judging him, at least at this point in time. I also want this video to act as a kind of advert for Kagurabachi, so anyone watching this who hasn't read it can still get a lot out of these first 3 arcs, which is the main reason why I have been purposefully vague about the general story progression. But to try and sum up my overall thoughts on Kagurabachi at this point in time, I'm in it for the long haul. It's not a perfect series. My biggest complaint would probably, again, have to be the series' fast pacing, which makes the first 2 arcs back to back extremely exciting. But having expected a little bit of breathing room after that, immediately jumping into another action-packed free-for-all was a bit disorienting. I've come around to it now, like I said earlier. I had to keep adding shit to this script because recent chapters are so good, but I do worry that it may become a problem as the series goes on. Another thing I'm worried about is that with big series like Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia having ended this year within months of each other, there is a vacuum that I'm sure Shonen Jump is eager to plug with properties like Kagurabachi and Sakamoto Days and the such. Not that I'd say they don't deserve the attention, but it's no secret how brutal the manga industry can be on both its failures and its successes, and I can only hope that Hokuzono and his colleagues aren't put in a position where they're forced to compromise between their work and their health. Because all these colour pages don't come cheap, and I'm not just talking about the ink costs. Other than those concerns, an hour into this video, what can I say at this point? From the opening chapters to now, Kagurabachi has impressed me more than I could have ever imagined, more than I think anyone could have imagined. It's proven to be far more skillful, artful, and ambitious than I think anyone was predicting going into it. Anytime I think it might slip, it comes roaring back with a vengeance, and I look forward very much to seeing what mad places it will end up going. So here's to Kagurabachi's future success. May slime never wield katana for as long as it lives. Thanks for watching the video. Merry Christmas, and have a tenoi New Year.
I'm drowning once again in melancholia, but that's nothing new to me. Oh, vengeance set me free. It's numbness, not the rage that is deadlier, and it keeps me from my peace. But I'll save you at least. Oh, preserving a legacy. All that you've given me, all the gifts you've left to tie, I swear will die as mine. All the words I never said, turn to belief instead. I'll never waver or cry, I never even thought to try, never laid to rest. We